So good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to the Roundtable on Technology, Change and the Future of Higher Education in Management, organized as part of the 17th IFSAM Congress. I'm Laura Michelini from Lumsa University in Rome, and I will chair this discussion together with Professor Maria Cinque, who is expert in teaching technologies and pedagogy. Let me first thank you, IFSAM organizer, for inviting us to manage this roundtable and leading this discussion. And thank you and welcome also to all our speakers coming from different parts of the world. Rick Nordgaard from Denmark, professor in educational design and technology. Joellen Coriel, she's professor in adult, professional and community education at the Texas State University. Welcome. Welcome also to Adriana Maya Rivas from Ecuador. She's professor in business administration at SPI. And welcome to Robert McIntosh, professor of business and law at Northumbria University, UK. Thank you all for being here. And let's start to discuss about the topic of today. We all know that COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the use of technology in management education. So we would like to start with the question, what might be the future of technologies in management education, and how could this technology affect the competitive positioning of business and management schools across the world? To engage, first of all, in this part of the roundtable, all the attendees or the participants, we would like to launch a very brief instant poll using Mentimeter, try to break the wall of technology and engage participants as we talk about technology and education. So let's start with sharing with you this QR code. You can choose to use the QR code or the link you see. And we can start with the first question. Okay, the first question is easy. It's where are you from? So the idea is to figure out from what part of the world you come. As we know that education and technology can impact differently according to the countries and the different type of communities.
If you want to read the code again, you can see it.
We can put it in the chat too.
Yes.
Okay, you also have the link in the chat. Okay, now we see you are voting.
We have people all around the world.
Yeah, we have people all around the world, United States, Latin American, China, Europe, India. Okay. You can continue voting for those who are in delay. I jump to the next question. Okay, we're asking you, what will the university of the future look like? So describe it in 3 words. So a big effort to summarize in just 3 words how you see the university in the future. Your inputs will help us also to guide the discussion of today. Okay, so let's start to come with shortly comments. So open, digital, hybrid, collaborative, free, online, accessible. So, but also student-led, global. Okay, flexible, democratic. Okay, thanks for your inputs. You can continue to vote. Let's go to the next question. Very fast, maybe too short to summarize the complexity of the phenomena, but what kind of teaching is, from your point of view, the most effective and efficient and effective? Okay, it seems that in-present and hybrid are the most preferred. And let's go to the next question. What are the main challenges in using technology for teaching? Even in this case, we ask you an effort to summarize in 1 sentence the main issues. So lack of technological support, engaged the audience. Students are too focused on tech during the class, social media addiction, training engagement. There are someone
This is hard to read.
From China. It's very hard to read, but maybe you can type in the chat in English if you want. Professor must develop new competencies, and this is why we are here with experts. Okay, so I don't want to take too much time. We collect this input and we will use it for the final discussion. And I now leave the floor to our speakers, starting from Rick Nordgaard, professor in educational design and technology at Danish School of Education at Aarhus University in Denmark. She will discuss about the future of the university, hybrid higher education beyond flexibility. So please take the floor and share your screen.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura and Maria. Let me just toggle the screens here. Hopefully you should be able to see the slide now. And I'll try to keep track of the 8 minutes. It's time here, so
thank you.
Yes, so it will be a short presentation, kind of opening for discussion. And then if I'm able to share in the chat with everyone afterwards, I don't think I have this opportunity now. Then I'll share some additional resources and inspiration and research for those that are interested. Yeah, and as mentioned, my name is Rikke Nørgaard, and I have for the last 9 years or so been researching, developing, and practicing online and hybrid education. And also what that means. So hybrid teaching, hybrid learning, hybrid higher education, and in the last couple of years, this notion of hybrid higher education to kind of underscore, highlight the complexities that are actually involved in this. It's not only parallel teaching where we have someone online and someone on site. It's actually much more complicated than that. So in this short presentation is a reflection on where I see we currently find ourselves as institutions, staff, academics, students in this almost post-pandemic world, and what opportunities and challenges might lie ahead for higher education and higher education institutions in this changing landscape, to kind of riff off a bit on the theme of this roundtable. So in a recent publication by the European University Association, and I will share the link to it in the chat afterwards, they put forward their vision for 2030 in higher education. And I think it's very interesting, and also kind of pinpointing some of these complexities that are actually involved in the future of higher education and in hybrid higher education. So in this report, they're talking about that key to success will be higher education institutions or universities that are open, that are without walls, and engage deeply with other parts of society while staying firmly rooted in their values. So we have these three models of universities or institutions. We have the mode one. Everyone knows that is kind of the ivory tower, where we kind of retreat back and are in charge of knowledge and education. We have the mode two, which is the competency factory, where we leap forward to society and try to provide them with whatever they say they need. And this kind of points towards this new mode three of higher education institutions, where we enter into a closer dialogue and a more kind of balanced relationship with society and the world. So to do this, universities or higher education institutions need to provide an open, transformative space through teaching and in learning for common knowledge production through research, education, innovation, and culture. So here we also see the highlighting of not only research-based education, but also research-producing education, where students actually engage in academic citizenship and produce research, produce knowledge during their education through entering into these kind of hybrid relationship with society, industry, other students, other disciplines, and so forth. Both kind of online, on-site, digital, analog, formally, informally, outside and inside institutions, and so on. So this kind of, you can sense the complexity of the notion of hybridity here. Also, universities, and again, this really highlight this mode three hyper-hybridity of future higher education. Universities and teaching needs to be cooperative and networked. Teachers need to be cooperative and networked with their students and outside the walls of the classroom. Students need to allow themselves to be networked and networking, to be hybrid and hybridized, to become kind of more strange creatures, other types of people that are transformed through their higher education. So on the one hand, you have universities as a place of respite and refuge, you know, the ivory tower, we preserve knowledge, and here is actually a room for us to be ourselves and become who we want to be. And on the other hand, there's this kind of outward bursting moment where we go out into the world and talk to citizens and industry and try to see how we can enter into these dialogues through our teaching. So what does this mean? Well, if we kind of pull it all together in this model, we can see that this goes for both teachers, learners, and institutions, that in the middle we have this notion of cooperative. In Danish, we have this notion of forsamlingshus, or a community hall, which was something we had in the countryside, where we went to eat dinner together, dance, learn to dance together, play instrument, listen to presentations, rent books, everything, you know, this kind of community center. And this is actually the future of higher education, is kind of returning to seeing themselves of this as this community hall, and being cooperative and networked in this way, having open boundaries, having this kind of transformative online, on-site spaces, almost kind of this permeable membrane where things can seep out and seep in when we teach. We can go on Twitter, we can go down to the public library, we can receive our education while we are also at a workplace, and so on and so forth. I'm having one eye at the time, so I think I have 2 minutes left max. I'm just seeing if you're nodding. Yeah, okay, great. So again, pulling this together and connecting it to my research on hybridity, we can see there's a need for educational development, institutional development as well, and the development of teaching that tries to kind of tackle these very, very complicated concepts. So what does it mean to practice teaching in a post-digital world where it actually does not make sense if something is online or on-site or digital and analog? What matters is the purpose of higher education and what we're trying to achieve here. How do we create learning environments that are placeful and where people feel belonging and connection and presence, whether that is online or on-site? How do we develop a post-pandemic pedagogy that kind of tackle this notion of hyper-complexity and hyper-hybridity and post-digital and so on and so forth? And I think now I'm quoting myself, but that's also allowed. I think what is kind of closest to my heart is when we create new systems, new formats, new teaching activities, new institutions, we must make sure they are not sinister or cold-hearted hybrids, talking about efficiency and employability and all these other letters with E, but kind-hearted hybrids, kind of honoring the deeper purpose of the university and ensuring that we are humans while receiving our education. Last slide. So for me to kind of pinpoint a way forward here is kind of three major frames or master frames for higher education. So we can try to work to position our teaching and learning and our institutions as more in the public. So for example, having our exams at a public library, as I've done, opening up and having online conferences for everyone to attend as our teaching practice. We can have a higher education for the public where we enter into these relationships with industry or culture or societal partners and try to help them, and they also help us. And we can have a higher education for the public where we try to kind of contribute to the world and open ourselves and the world up to better futures. Thank you. Again, I'll share some resources in the slides. I think that was very much my 8 minutes. Sorry if I didn't keep the time entirely, and looking forward to discussions after what I'm sure will be more exciting, even more exciting presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing your inputs and your great insight about the future of the university. Let me immediately leave the floor and for all the attendants, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat and then we will read it at the end in the Q&A session. Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much. Let me leave the floor to Joellen Coriel.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
It's so nice. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Professor in Adult, Professional and Community Education at the Texas State University, USA. Thank you. So please take the floor and share your screen.
Okay, I will do, but I just want to point out my new backgrounds because a student sent me the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, and I thought, okay, that's the perfect background for a conversation on digital leadership and teaching and that kind of thing. So, but now I will share my screen so that you can actually see something different. Okay, let's get started. Okay, can you see the screen okay? All right, wonderful, thanks. So my background is in adult, professional, and community education, but I think the reason that I'm here is that I have had the opportunity to work with Professor Maria Cinque in faculty development for teaching and learning and teaching methodologies and strategies. And so it's a real pleasure to talk with you today about active learning and digital technologies. And one of the things that struck me in the Mentimeter is someone indicated that one of the challenges is that we're trying to put technology and digital, all things digital, prior to the pedagogy. And I could not agree more. That is exactly the way that I would come at this as well. So I'm going to start out first, though, with our with our students, because that's where we should be beginning. This is why we are at university, and this is why we're having this conversation as well as our learners. And so I'm going to start out with just a little bit of information about today's learners. And this comes from generational studies that, that help us to understand sort of in general what each of these new groups of students who are coming into our universities are coming with. And so these students have witnessed growing income inequality. They're not as confident as our millennials. This is the Generation Z generation. They know they actually have to work hard in their lives. They have less experience with independent decision making. And if you have anybody in your life, aside from students, you will know this is really true. They need more guidance, reassurance than millennials. They are eager to do a good job and afraid to make mistakes. They are less optimistic about their career aspects. And they know they need social skills development. And the reason why is because they are totally dependent on their phones, which are extensions of their bodies. And so they realize that they need more of those skills and the social skills, and they're very practical and career focused. There's also a few things that we can learn also from specific researchers in generations. They're in Italy, so Bigi, Bonera, and Corvi identify there's heightened geographic mobility for these students. They're well-traveled, they're multilingual, they are more comfortable with migrancy and learning about different cultures. And importantly, Morchio and Trombetta found, and this is important that we understand these learners as we think about the digital environment, they desire learning and development planning. They want practical skills. They want hands-on experiences. They ranked, as they have begun graduating, communication and interpersonal skills, problem-solving skills, and management skills as the most important competencies that they believe that they'll need as they move into their careers. They also are obviously very comfortable working with technology, sometimes more comfortable with technologies than we as professors are. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that's happening in classrooms. And they're also worried about those softer skills and of communication and problem solving and management than earlier generations were. And these are some of those transversal, or depending on the terminology that you're using, or soft skills that are needed in today's work environment as identified by the World Economic Forum. And you can see these different things: emotional intelligence, critical thinking, managing people, judgment and decision making, and so on. And one of the things that we're really lucky that we have a lot of research on is active learning strategies and how they are really valuable in helping to develop some of these competencies, along with the subject matter competencies and skills that we're trying to teach our students in our classrooms. So very quickly, what is active learning? It is really a collaborative and engagement in the learning process rather than a passive experience with learning. It's based on learning theory of constructionism and experiential. It's anything that a student does besides sitting and listening to a lecture and perhaps taking some notes. It involves social construction of new knowledge, and it requires listening, reflecting on prior knowledge and experiences, sharing ideas, problem solving, hearing different perspectives, engaging creativity, and taking accountability for one's own learning, which is what we all want our students to be able to do. And we want them to do it more naturally than they do, but we have to teach them how to do that. For those who haven't heard of active learning, there's a lot of research out there about that, but I'm going to move on because we only have 8 minutes. So this is also something that I've found that's really interesting in the work that I've done with professional development with faculty on instruction and strategies for teaching and that kind of thing. This is what they've been telling me they want to learn in this new digital environment. They want to know better how to organize their lessons to capture everyone's attention. Well, this is something that is not new. They've wanted to do this forever, even before we went into the digital world. They want to make peer instruction work better in online settings. They want to engage in those high flex classrooms, which we're seeing a lot of right now and which are really complex and not difficult to manage. They want to know how to engage concurrently both their online and their in-present students. They're interested in strategies in digital environments for transversal skills. They want to know how to manage their time and schedule. We know that the digital environment has changed that schedule a little bit. You know, sometimes it goes faster, sometimes it goes slower, depending on what kinds of things are going on. So they want to know how to do that better. They want big strategies and little details on how to have students feel safe and fully engaged in their classrooms, whether digitally or in presence or both. They want to feel more confident that they know how to engage their students online, and they recognize that this conversion process is how one faculty member said it, like, what is it? Here I've been teaching in presence for so long, I'm converting this to this either fully online or hybrid or high flex situation is not just the same as it was when I was in presence. How do we do this well? And how to efficiently move from in presence to this dual mode of high flex, giving priority to the most important aspects of their subject matter. This is some of the stuff that we need to understand about research on active learning. For decades, we know about this. So if you're skeptical about active learning, I recommend you go out to the research to realize that student performance, student engagement, student test scores all across the board are better with active learning strategies and engagements. Women who are for example, some women who are in STEM fields and tend to be, fewer there, do better in active learning environments, as do some students with disadvantaged backgrounds with our different cultural diversity that we have in our classrooms. So take it from all of us. Active learning is an important thing to do. So some effective active teaching with technologies. You want to be sure that you're engaging your students with both you as the teacher, but also with those other students, and which is more complex. But you want to be encouraging interaction. There's a lot of digital technologies out there, applications, software that can really do that. We saw Mentimeter this morning. We're looking at Zoom. We're seeing how we can interact, but in different ways, breakout rooms and so forth. You want to involve a lot of different types of input, and that usually involves lecture, but it also can mean reading, it can be videos, it can be podcasts, it can be simulations, all kinds of stuff. You want to view the whole class as a collection of little chunks so that you can understand that there are people in there, they're groups of small groups of people. And then you want to realize that your goal is to be continually assessing the learning. Doing that online is actually sometimes easier than it is to do in presence. So there are different ways we can do that. And you want to be really focusing on activities that continue to build some of those transversal skills we talked about earlier. Some of the things that we really want to talk about here with regard to some of the best practices for the digital classroom is that e-learning students have actually indicated in research that they ask more questions online than they do in presence. And it has usually to do something to do with feeling a little less worried or anxious to ask questions in presence. So be prepared for that. We also have to realize that it's about shifting students' expectations about what the class will do. The in-class time is a great time to give them time to practice after they've had some input for new knowledge, to practice with that new knowledge with each other, with their own experiences, to understand how they are learning and where those gaps are for reteach, and for that feedback that you need to be able to do that, and for clarifying important topics that they're maybe not getting as well as you'd like them to do. Pop into those breakout rooms, witness their learning, witness their conversations, and keep them engaged as much as possible. Finally, I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about one of the trends that we're seeing coming into the space, and that is of learning in digital spaces in higher education. That's adaptive teaching and stealth assessment. I'm someone who finds this interesting, and I'm also a little bit of a cynic around it. So I want to see how pedagogy comes first, but here's some things to understand about this. It is based in competency learning. It's basically software analysis of learner interactions that provide an opportunity for the software to gauge where the learner is in that developmental process of understanding what they need to understand and being able to do things with it. It involves computer applications, games, simulations. It's dynamic in that it can adapt to the structure of the e-learning environment to support learning by providing new challenges matched to student performance. it's personalized for the students, and it provides very, very good feedback or assessment to teachers so that they know how to add or change the software or add activities to help the students to get to where they need to be. And ultimately, it's purported to provide a reduction in learner anxiety as they're not aware that they're being assessed through the learning process. This is a whole conversation. This is probably a whole course. It's certainly a whole career for people to be thinking more about this, but pedagogues and teachers need to be involved in those the design processes of this kind of learning. So that's it for me. I hope I didn't go too far over 8 minutes. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'm happy to have a conversation with any questions later.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for your inputs, for sharing your expertise and your experiences. Let me now leave the floor to the other speakers, who is a teacher in management. So the idea of this roundtable is to mix expertise from pedagogic and teaching with management. Adriana Amaya Rivas, she's a professor of business administration at SI in Ecuador, and she will share with us her experience in using digital technologies and apps in her country. Adriana, yes, I see you.
Yes, I am here.
Okay.
I am just waiting that you finish, and then yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I should share my screen.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, I am really amazed with the two first presentations. I think that if I make Joellen before, my suffer of this journey will be less, no, because it was really a challenge to start to using these digital tools and apps, no. So I am really glad for this invitation. As Laura said, my name is Adriana Maya. I am assistant professor of entrepreneurship and innovation management. So usually my faculty, my colleagues always expect that the professors that are teaching innovation and entrepreneurship are the first to take the risk, no, to try these new things. So it's what happened to me, no. So, but actually, is what I can tell is my experience, no, how I start my journey. But what I have learned is that I think that all the professors, now all the lectures that we are trying to teach management should start with these important questions. How do we ensure the digital tools and apps that we select for use will enrich? We are gonna really enrich and stake our teaching, no? I think that in this moment we have this important challenge because we have so many digital tools. We have Miro, we have a Mural, we have many different, no? So now is the time to think, not just to select whatever tools, no? So just to think about how it's gonna be the learning experience, how is gonna this protect also our students' privacy, because there are so many data tools that maybe are not the appropriate one, no? So the first is actually maybe sometimes we can think that the digital tools can help us and can reduce our work, but in fact I don't see that in that way, no, because we need to take care of other things, no. I saw this. I saw the classes like a kind of when we are go to the theater, no, we need to prepare the stage, and then the students and the professors are gonna make the performance, but in fact we have to make different process backstage in order to really assure that the learning experience are gonna be perfect, no, is what we really want to do, no, achieve. So one of the first things that I try to do is to really customize, no. We, in this moment, I am a professor for the masters, for the agribusiness, for EMBA, for MBA, for hospitality. So there are different audience, no? So their different audience has different competences. So for example, when I have to teach to my students that they are doctors and they are nurses, I don't know, but in Ecuador, sometimes they are really like refuse the technology. They really like the show off, to be face-to-face classes, no? And it was really challenging because at the beginning, all of us, we have been trained, no? We have been prepared to do and to teach with the case studies, and then to make this kind of show off, and then to try to help the students to develop, no? And then we need to transform these kind of competences. But that is the first thing that I do, no? How is the audience that I am going to encounter, no? There are other audience that they are really good and they will adjust really great with the digital tools, no? Also, what I try to do is like, I try to review all the data of the different tools I have, no? For example, if I am gonna use any kind of simulations, if I am gonna use, for example, any kind of different tool, I try to understand what data I am gonna get, no? In order to help the students, if, okay, it's gonna be helpful for them, they are gonna really understand, it's gonna really enhance the concepts I wanna transmit to them, or maybe it's not useful, no? So that's things that I am trying to take care of, no? As Jolene said, it's important that we really care about the instructional design, no? Means that we need to take care of each of the moments of our sessions, you know, the beginning in which that we need to try to open the class, later the development of the class, and then assure that the students are really developing the competences, or they are really getting the learning objectives that we established, no? And I don't know you, but in my experience, that part was really hard when I tried to start with the online classes, because online classes, sometimes when we start to develop the competence, it's like the time flies. It's not the same 1 hour that we have face-to-face, no? Because we have some technology problems, and then we need to wait for the students, and then at the end, we don't have 60 minutes, we have 45 minutes, and then we need to be creative. What part of the sessions maybe we don't need to teach, and they can do it by themselves, no? So in that moment, we need to come with plan A, B, C, D, so it's more demanding, no? So I think that it's great, these kind of spaces, because the students can see there is no challenges just for them, it's also challenges for us, no? That part, and then we need to maximize this kind of student engagement, no? It's important. It's important that they see that maybe we are using this kind of digital tools, not just, for example, we create a forum, we create a kind of debate, but we, the professors, need to be behind, not trying to push, try to enrich this kind of conversations. No? So that is also important to do. No? For example, we have different, I have different platforms I use, like one of that I really love is Microsoft Teams. I think that is really collaborative, but sometimes it's a little hard to perform for the students, depending of the students. I also use Google Classrooms. I usually also use Miro, depends of what I want to get. If I want to get a kind of a conceptual framework that they can create together, okay, I do it. No, so but I really think about what we want to learn and what is the best tool that we can use in management for them. No, one of the digital tools I really love is the simulations. I work a lot with the simulations because I think that through the simulations, also the students can, in some ways, they can experiment different cultures, no? Because the setting that in which one they are gonna work is different settings, no? It's not from Ecuador, maybe it's is one company in the United States, one company in Europe, so they can learn also this kind of cultures, and is part of the management decisions, no? So it's important. So with this kind, we can develop this kind of engagement that we are trying to get now from the students. No, also through the simulations we can have this kind of experiential learning environment. No, so it is kind of important, but to prepare in order to be ready to use a simulation also is really challenge for us, no, for the students, because actually we don't develop simulations. What we do is to get simulations from Harvard, no, but in order to be ready to play the simulation is a lot of work that we need to be done to be ready that the students perform well and to answer all the questions. But I think that this is a good strategy, no, because also through the simulations students can play different roles. For example, in management there are some areas like organizational behavior, like change management, like leadership, that sometimes this kind of fields can sound a little hard to understand or to take the decisions. Now, with the simulations, the students can see how the organizational structures matters, how to create some kind of change process is important, no? How the decisions are gonna impact, no, the performance of the organizations. No, I think that this part is really engaging the students, and finally the professors. What we can do is to consolidate their own performance with the lessons that we're trying to get. No, I think that that part is one of the things that I really love to do. So just for ending, one of the things is to we need to take a moment to be sure that the information that we are gonna get from the different tools for management is accurate, is really valuable, and is really reliable. No, okay. Also, what it worked for me is to have a kind of community, because when we start this journey, none of my colleagues have these kind of competencies. So we start to share, oh, what can work for you, no? What do you think about this platform? What do you think about this? What do you think, no? So we start to make like a kind of different glossary or this kind of database in which we already know about, okay, this platform is good, this outcome is gonna be helpful, this one have this kind of problems, but you have your community, no? You, like professor, you are not alone. So in sometimes this kind of support is important. I think that in this moment I am more able to decide by myself. Now, but at the beginning, to have this kind of support is important, no? Because many universities are really ahead about this, no? About the hybrid education, about online education. And then we, especially in Latin America, we are really just, I think that at the first stage, no? And then we really, this kind of experts to help us, no? To understand, to help us to adjust our instructional design. So that is really, really important, no? That should be my presentation, Laura.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Adriana, for sharing with us your experiences, your tips, practical tips, and yeah, your experience from your country. So your point of view is a very interesting one. So now we change a little bit the perspective. So from a practical point of view, we try to analyze the phenomenon from a broad approach. So I'm honored to present Robert McIntosh, who is a professor of business and law at Northumbria University, who will show us a different kind of, let's say, area. So we analyze, first of all, what characterized the UK country, but also he will show us how the digital landscape is altering the relationships among academics, students, and employees. So I leave the floor to Professor McIntosh. Okay, so yeah, we see your slides.
So good afternoon, folks. It's lovely to see you. Just put that into screen show. I've got the hardest job because I follow three really excellent presentations, and I don't have the Starship Enterprise behind me, but I do have the village in Scotland where I grew up behind me, which I did at the beginning of the pandemic because it struck me that in all this digital interaction, place and personal narrative are really important. And I want to just, for the first part of my 8 minutes of precious time, I want to just reflect across the three conversations we've already had. So I was really struck by Rika's sort of sacred space that we would go to learn to eat together, to meet together, to learn to dance, and thinking that that sense of community is what higher education, what universities are about. They're about coming together, aren't they? But that's a view from the past. I think, Joellen, you pointed towards the future, saying that these new students, these Generation Z students, are more anxious, more mobile, more uncertain about their own skill set, and probably more realistic about what a changing world we live in. And then, Adriana, I really liked your bringing us back to the present and saying, you know, that in theory, those of us in business schools and schools of management that teach innovation and change and should be the ones who are best able to change. But in actual fact, we find ourselves thinking, wow, those Generation Z kids, I don't know how they do that. I struggle to get my screen to share properly. And so I'm going to spend the few minutes that I've got just saying something about the nature of business schools, and I'll use my own experience in the UK, and of course with a very global audience there's a significant danger that it might be different in your part of the world, but I think some of the pattern might hold true. And then I'll just close by saying, what does that tell us about the future of our industry? And in the UK, I'm the chair of a thing called the Chartered Association of Business Schools, which represents 120 different business schools in the UK alone. And so you can imagine how many thousands of business schools there are in the world. And in the UK, it's the second largest community of students of any discipline. Medicine is bigger, but everything else is smaller. So there's just under 20,000 staff. FTE stands for full-time equivalent. So there's 20 or so thousand staff teaching 441,000 students in the UK in our business schools. So it's a thing which we do at real scale. It's not that sort of ancient view of a small classroom with a small number of people. It's a big thing with big numbers of people interacting in different spaces. And some other things about the nature of business education are that it's very, very international. So in the UK, 1 in 3 of all of the international students that come to the UK come to study business. 1 in 7 of all of the students in the UK of every discipline from archaeology to zoology studies business. And yet there is this perception beyond the business school community that really we do executive education, we do MBAs. But in actual fact, in the UK, 2/3 of our students are Generation Z undergraduates, trying to think about what their career is going to be. Now, some of those dynamics might be different in your part of the world, but I'd be surprised if your business schools were really small and really insular. They tend to be very big and very international wherever you go. And I wanted to then just think a little bit about the context in which this learning has happened in business schools for over a century and how it happens now. And so there's always been, I think, this process of academics, both as educators and researchers, thinking about their relationship to employer organizations, either because they're going to employ our students or because those are the organizations we want to research. And so there's a 3-part relationship of us, the academic community, those employer organizations around the university, and the students who spend some time with us and then go off to become employers themselves and sometimes come back to us. And let's just think a little bit about what the last 4 or 5 years, and in particular what the pandemic and the digital revolution has done to those relationships. And so, first of all, we're all used now to this idea that as academics, we teach in this, what Ricky called hyper-hybrid mode. Some people are online, some people are in person, sometimes at the same time. And so these images of our classrooms are changing from amphitheaters full of people sitting passively listening to us at the front to us having to multitask and go across multiple screens. The research data that I looked at most recently in the UK about our students said 2 things which really surprised me. that when they're consuming digital learning, they'd mostly do so on a mobile phone, not on a laptop or a desktop or a tablet, but on a phone. And they often do it when they're not stationary. They're in a gym or they're on a bus or they're on a train. So it's quite a different context than our imagination of what a learning space looks like. And our employers are changing. This is the most common, the most popular picture I sent on Twitter during the pandemic. And it was a picture of my dining room where I was trying to rig up some stuff for teaching, and it was on cans of tomatoes that I ended up working. But, you know, we work in these unusual spaces. We don't work in offices very much anymore all of the time. And so these relationships are taking place in hyper-hybrid spaces. And I thought, just in closing, I would just reflect for a moment on some of the things that changes about our unspoken assumptions about these very ancient universities or these institutions, our universities, and how they are changing. The work that we do, the skill set that we have as educators, the skill sets that we're trying to provide to future employers, they're changing, aren't they? And it's much less about technical skills and much more to do with things like the ability to broadcast, to understand learner analytics and audience engagement. There's much more to think about. If I record this lecture once, for all time, I could distribute it infinitely with almost no cost, whereas to take a January start cohort or to run the evening class version or to run a second group would historically have meant we have to do it twice, and that's expensive. It prompts us to think about who and where our students are and how and what they do when they study, because I didn't think they study on a mobile phone whilst they're in the gym. I thought they sat, you know, in perfect silence in a lecture theatre or in a library and concentrated exclusively on me. And they don't. They do multiple things at the same time. The world of work that we're preparing them for looks much more like my picture of my living room with, you know, a laptop on an ironing board stuck between the cat and the television, and, you know, than the kind of Starship Enterprise office space that Jolyn has behind her. That's what world work looks like. It challenges us to think a little bit about what the business model of education is. Who pays for and who provides education? Our students are in all likelihood going to become co-producers with us and may tell us things that we didn't know. And when I finish sharing the slide, which I'll do in just a moment, I'll share a link to an article that I wrote a few years before the pandemic, about the undergraduate provision and what that looks like. And people going to university from high school or college or wherever they've come from used to think they would come to one place, they'd study there full time, they'd study there for a period of several years, and they would have one provider. And of course, if we think about any other part of our life, the way in which we organise our travel or how we book a meal if we're going out for something to eat, we do all of that in very different ways. We use different providers for different things. We spend a lot on some things and less on others. And in the future, I think our educational environment is going to be much more fragmented. I might be a student at multiple universities at the same time, sometimes online, sometimes in person, at different price points, and collaging together all the bits of education I need to become a qualified accountant or manager or marketeer, you know. And so there's something about the way in which we accredit and we collaborate in that space, which I think is going to be radically different. And at that, I think that's my 8 minutes up, Laura, so I'll stop. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your inputs. Very useful, especially to open the Q&A session. If you have any questions from the audience, you can write it on the chat. Also, if speakers have questions they want to pose to each other, so you are all welcome.
So whilst people are maybe thinking of questions to ask in the chat facility, I wanted to just make a question for us as a panel, Laura. So Ricky, your idea of this kind of ancient space in which we would go on the margins of the town or village that we lived in to eat together and to learn to dance. I guess in the modern world, you might be participating in multiple of those, some physical, some digital with different communities and making different choices about what you learn and where. And let's say that your ambition in life was to become a chartered accountant. Well, there's some professional status around that where you have to be able to do some things to a competent level. And it's how we as university providers certify that qualification and the competence to practice in a context where you might have learned this dance in person in Denmark and that dance digitally in Ecuador. And I think that's a really interesting challenge about how the educational world has boundaries that are shifting. And I wanted to just invite our panelists to reflect on that and what it tells us about us and what it tells us about our students.
So people from the audience can use the question and answer section because the chat is closed. But if there are no question, I also would like to ask a question to all the panelists. So thanks for all the inputs you gave us. And what I was thinking is actually management education, like business education, engineering education were among the first to incorporate technologies and to implement blended forms of learning, also to meet the needs of diverse population, for example, executive education. So this was a tradition, a very good tradition. But my impression, I think, is that during the pandemic, not only in management education, maybe also in other courses, instead of going a step forward, somehow we sometimes went a step back. What I mean is that from one day to another, we were pushed online, and the majority of teachers, as Adriana said, were not prepared. And so, as someone said, it was not a model of teaching, it was a remote distance teaching, very focused on teaching and on contents rather than on interaction. So there was no instructional design, as Joellen said. And students as well, they were not prepared. Adriana said that. So somehow, might this also be a lesson learned for the future? So how, in case of emergency, how do we recreate a model which is not the old traditional one? And on the other hand, you say students sometimes are not keen on technologies. We know that of digital native is only a myth. Yeah? So how do we teach students to use technologies? Third, Adriana said, are we sure, and sorry, I will stop here, I promise, that technology enhances learning? We know that some authors of the so-called evidence-based education research field, they have said, they have proved that there is no evidence up to now that technology might enhance learning. So we have no big evidence, we have some hints. So how do we cope with that? And in this sense, I would come back to this vision of the post-digital university. I like the idea of hybrid, hyper-hybrid higher education in the public, for the public, with the public. Maybe we start with Rike, since she has raised as a, and try to, if you can describe more this model, which is beyond technology, maybe.
Yeah, I can try to ramble a bit, and then shut up so everyone else can speak as well. And I think I'll try to kind of merge your excellent question, Robert, and also your question, Laura. And so I think I see some, like, what's it called, like tectonic plates. There's like some major shifts happening on the macro scale of higher education institutions at the moment. And I'm talking from a European perspective here, of course. So yeah, not everything and everywhere is the same, of course. But if we again look at that report from the European University Association, which I quite like, there's for the first time in many years a very high underscoring of culture and higher education as a culture, higher education institution as cultural institutions as well. there's this big push for values and remembering or reconnecting to the deeper purpose and deeper values of higher education. And of course, this came out during the pandemic, but I'm sure the work started before that. And what it kind of points towards to this vision of 2030 that there's kind of been conferences on and webinar series on is kind of, so I'm also working with empathic design and human-centered design and speculative design. And so these more strange design positions that I try to put into educational design and instructional design is really talking about designing for preferable worlds and what that might require. So concepts and notions such as feeling at home in education, or full-bodied, full human education is something, at least in Denmark, we often forget to design for and talk about also in the digital and online and hybrid. So often I get asked to talk about what we can learn from the pandemic, and I often start and say, well, one thing we can't learn from the pandemic is anything about hybrid digital or online education, because that was not hybrid digital or online education that was happening during the pandemic. It was emergency teaching and pandemic teaching and learning, and people struggling to just make do. And so we shouldn't learn anything about good online, digital and hybrid education from the pandemic. What we can learn from the pandemic is the need to ensure that in these new models, there's a feeling of being present, being alive, being human, being together, and all these kind of deeper educational values. And how do we do that without losing ourselves to technology? I think that's the hard question that really kind of pressing onto our screens at the moment.
Thank you.
Any other speaker? Otherwise, we have questions from the audience.
Yes, we have a question from Sergio. 1 on 5 students in management, 19% in private higher education, top 10 privates. Higher education market share is 66%. Distance learning is 35% of all courses. How to assure learning on distance learning?
This is Brazil, from Brazil, actually.
From Brazil.
Yes,
okay.
And this is a question to Robert. So Sergio from Brazil asks how to assure learning on digital learning if we have such big numbers, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, and I answered Sergio's question online and said that historically we would send out learning materials, even in the days when we would send out printed learning materials, and then we would send you a test and we'd ask you to write your answers, and then we'd be able to assess whether you'd learned. And in a much more collaborative sense, if we're doing some project work together, we could do our assessment around how effective that project is. And I would push back slightly against Ricky's we shouldn't learn anything from the pandemic. I think that, for example, we know that the vaccine, which many countries have rolled out very effectively to help address the worst of the symptoms of the pandemic, was developed faster than any vaccine in human history, and was not all developed in person in one place. It was developed very collaboratively. So I think there are some examples of really excellent practice. And also, although it was a bit lumpy and a bit emergency and a bit hand to mouth, and I think all of the academics I speak to say that that was really a traumatic experience of having over a weekend to start figuring out what double click on what and how do you record and all of these things. But it did get over. It was like an immersion experience, wasn't it? It was like jumping into a cold bath. Once the initial shock has got over, you think, well, so I can survive this. And so I think we should take from the experience that it does work for some people, for some things, and actually for some audiences it works even better. I was remembering the auto captioning that Jolyn had on her screen and thinking, I used to be amazed at hearing it auto translate me in Scottish into English, to the point where almost I lose focus on saying new things because I'm so busy thinking, oh, that's interesting that it understood that word. But that's an amazing thing. And for some learning profiles, that's even better than in person because I can replay that to myself multiple times until I gradually develop an understanding. And so I think if we take that back to Sergio's question about assessment, I think we have to be really creative about the way in which we assess. And actually, in these hyper-hybrid spaces, given that the world of work is much more like that, if we were all collaborating on a paper, we'd be sending each other drafts. We probably would get together around a conference. It might happen. That would be lovely, but it's not necessary. And so we'd be thinking about the world of work is much more like that. So the assessment can be much more like that. Here's an actual product that we ask you to think about the launch for in a new market, or here's an actual HR problem that we want to design a workforce experience that's more inclusive. And, and then we collaborate on the doing of that, and we can assess whether we've attained the learning outcomes from that. And it's much, much more exciting than, you have 15 minutes and 300 words, and I want to hear your best answer to this question, none of which is really like what the real world is like.
Thank you. Thank you. There is another question from the audience. We saw, Robert, you already answered on the chat, but maybe it's interesting to share with other panelists. From Juliana, we increasingly have to teach students problem solving and decision-making skills. How can we do that when our modules are heavily focused on sharing content? How we can use technology to help in this sense? So maybe Joellen, or who wants to answer?
Joellen was focusing on the importance of soft skills and the perception of Gen Z. Please.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. I mean, frankly, the digital space doesn't change that need before or after, we have the digital technologies before or after the pandemic. And so the idea of, if I understand the question correctly, it's that our models are a lot about providing content while students are in class, which is typically through lecture. And then how do we increase the ability to their practice in problem solving? Because we have to remember that when we learn, we have to practice. We don't just hear something and know it and know how to use it. We have to actually practice understanding, practice doing, practice thinking. And so, there are a lot of methods out there that will have professors and teachers thinking about their lessons as in small modules throughout. Let's say you have an hour, you have 3 hours, whatever you have with your students, thinking about them in modules in which there's the flipped classroom that I'm not going to go into, but this idea that we have that students have opportunities to get new information from a wide variety of input. So it can be from a mini lecture, not more than maybe 20-25 minutes, or perhaps it's a video for 15 minutes, or it's reading that they did outside the classroom, and then you bring them while they're in the classroom, at least at times, in opportunities to think about what they're learning and to put it into some sort of application in terms of problem solving. And so if you want your students to problem solve, you have to give them opportunities to problem solve, and then you have to give them feedback on what they did well and what they didn't do so well, and what they brought in, what they should have brought in, so that they can move into more of a mastery of the kinds of problem solving you want them to do with new content. So it is a matter, in my opinion, from that traditional model of content rich input for your times that you have with your students, is provide opportunities for them to get some of that prior to coming to class, and then reiterating some of the most important parts in mini lectures, and then actually having them work together and work to problem solve in breakout rooms. There's a lot of different applications that you can use for that kind of work, and then to give them feedback on their work. So that's basically my approach to that question.
Just to complement your line, when I start with this, for example, I don't know if you read the news about the pandemic at that time in Ecuador, the things were not well at all. And then what we face is that the students cannot focus, cannot concentrate. So they cannot read the same amount of content that they used to. No? So we need to change. We professors need to start to develop, to short the content. No? Actually, at the beginning, it was really work for us. We need to work many hours in order to help the student, because we already have passing these moments, and then we have so many different courses with the different master students. And then, for example, one of the master students that more suffer is the master students in agribusiness. Can you imagine how is the countryside in Ecuador? And then in Ecuador, in the countryside, we still have good companies. So they were working in those companies, but the students, they don't have really good infrastructure with the online. So they try their best now to do what they can do. Okay, and then what we start to do is to reduce the content. We professors need to change our mind. No, start with the case study with that maybe traditional have 30 pages, not 30 pages that they won't read. So we need to reduce that 30 pages in 2 pages. No, we need to do this because to assure that at least the student are gonna read these 2 pages now, and then also it's like a kind of commitment, because the students can see that we are also like challenge ourselves, to trying to give that part to them, and they need to put it back. So that is what we face that we have to do, and now I think that is a good way, actually, Joellen said to make this kind of the micro lectures. Now there is a theory, the theory of flow. It's like the students cannot keep the concentration for so long. Even face to face. Now online is also, it is harder. So they only can focus around 20 minutes, 25 minutes. After that, you already lost. Them. It's something that have already we have evidence about this. We have evidence about the creativity. Maybe the persons only can focus 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and they really need to change the activity. So they make this kind of 20 minutes, and then the student, for example, in my case, they start, okay, I want to work. It's like, just stop talking and then give me my task, and we go to the breakout rooms, and then we create, and they can make this kind of community with their teams. And it's something that start to change, and they make their own way, But actually, we professors, I think that we need to be very open to change, and then to create new materials, and maybe it was hard. I think so.
Thank you, Adriana. Rike, you raise your hand.
You want to add something? Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think it's an excellent discussion. So just to follow up on that, I think, and on Hyacinth's comment on the camera, and which
thanks, because I was
which there was a lot of discussions about it, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. Can we kind of enforce them to turn on their cameras? And of course we cannot. There can be like a broad range of ethical reasons for not enforcing people to turn on their cameras. They can be at home with their kids, they can be sick, they can be in a very small space where they're not comfortable sharing their privacy, and so on and so forth. They can look horrible because there's have corona and stuff like that. So how do we feel not teaching to the void, as it was called, like teaching into this black hole and feeling alone? Well, you can be very fond of hearing yourself, as I am, and then the void doesn't really matter. But if you are a bit less narcissistic and arrogant than me, and just love to hear yourself talk, and you can talk into the void forever, I think what we really worked on in the online masters that I'm running is working together on stuff that doesn't require a turned on camera. So Jamboards or Miro, as someone talked about, a shared Google Doc where we talk together through writing, and having that shared on the screen rather than people shared on the screen actually created kind of an intense presence. in that document. And then because no one was really speaking, or I was only speaking, everyone could actually have their microphone turned on. And so there was like these little giggles or coughs or something, like a very kind of fleshy presence was suddenly there in the room. So I think that's one thing, not being dependent on looking each other in the eye and having that as a measure of attention. I think the Black Void really told us an interesting insight as well, because were students ever present? Like before in the lecture hall, their bodies were there, but I don't think they were more present than when they had their cameras turned off. It's just signaling in a more clear way that if it's dead silent and dead black, then we need perhaps to think about scripting our teaching differently. And so to your great comment also, Adriana, I think the danger is to not lose the community in a certain way. So how do we create these new ways of teaching and learning that are not about individuals' learning trajectories or micro-credential learning, but more about creating this community where we work together on a project and drag people in from like vocational or professional areas, drag citizens in or go out in the world online. And so again, back to this, which are very similar to the way we do a research article or research project or development project. And so it's so strange for me, at least, that the way we teach and teach our students to learn is radically different than how they are going out there, how we collaborate and learn. So again, if we have a test they can cheat on, it's not the students that are cheating, it's the test that is thought or designed in a wrong way, because then it's because the knowledge is already there and they can find it. And so they should, I don't know, get an A. And if we don't want them to just find knowledge and plug and play or copy paste into a document, then we need to think about other types of assessment and evaluation that are perhaps ipsative or more formative, or they can deliver a project that and reflect on how that made a change to someone. Yeah. So yeah, just kept me ranting in my head. So I think that what we are in danger of losing on the what's in it for me kind of vocational, also like the slide that said, most important thing to student is how they can use it in their professional life after higher education. What are the competencies? How can I gain competencies that will, get me a job? I'm not necessarily sure that's what higher education or universities are about. Actually, it's not that they are not allowed to gain competencies, but there's also something else at stake here: academic citizen and how we contribute to society as academics.
Thank you, Rick. And Robert.
So I wanted to pick up on that question that was about, talking into the void and say that I think there's three different things that we need to be mindful of. The first that Ricky's pointed to, I think that's a really interesting, completely new experience, that you sit with your microphone on in silence, collaborating on a Google Doc. That's something that we've not done before, and I think that takes us way out of our comfort zone. That might be a really interesting and different thing. So that's one. So we have to be open to this idea that we have to innovate and have new experiences, and they'd be new for us and new for our student communities. The second, which I alluded to in the slides and in my answer to somebody online, I think we have to think about completely different skill sets. Post-pandemic, having spent many hours talking to a very small screen saying, anybody, any questions? You can't tell if anybody's listening at all. I have so much more admiration now for broadcasters, radio and television broadcasters, who can just beam energy, and sound enthusiastic at 6 a.m. in the morning when doing the traffic report. That's an amazing skill set. And we don't really train our academic colleagues in those skills, but we probably need to begin to work with those kinds of communities, both for the ability to connect to an audience remotely and for their ability to do the kind of editorial work that Adriana was talking about. How do I take 30 pages worth of complicated information about the economy and boil it into a 55-second clip You know, that's what journalism is about. And so I think we should learn a bit about that. And I think that the other thing that is new and novel is we're so used to live theatre. You know, when we go to a lecture theatre, there's a tremendous buzz that comes off of standing in front of 400 or 500 people and keeping their attention. Of course, their attention is mostly based on the fact that we're going to mark their exam and they're being polite, you know, or maybe they're just, it's a comfortable place in which they could go to sleep for a few hours and not be that engaged. But in different parts of our life, even us non-Gen Zers are used to the idea of asynchronous feedback. So I say something in a blog or on a Twitter feed or on Facebook, and comments build up over time and conversations take these really interesting twists and turns. And, you know, you might have got silence from an audience when you ask them online if they haven't got their cameras on, does anybody have any questions? But you might get dozens and dozens of thumbs up or disagrees or emojis or that give you a sense of how the conversation is flowing. And I think it just means that we have a completely different skill set. And it's not surprising if you think that our university system has been like this for literally centuries. You stand at the front, you talk, they write the answers down, you mark them. And in less than a decade, we've got these completely different technologies, completely different industries that we should be learning from. And we're all just in the embryonic stages of figuring out how to do that differently. So I think I would just encourage us to keep thinking about which industries, which specialists, what skill sets, and what innovative new experiences might learning comprise.
Thank you. There is a last question from the audience. Faima Hashiri, he asked if you use case study approach to teaching. Let me just share one experience from my side as I teach I teach management. And I use a different approach in case study because I ask students to write a case study. So I ask students to select a company, find it among the community. So they have to select them, they have to interview some managers and to write the case study using the theory we use in class, like five competitive forces, value chain, and so on. And then they share each other. So I think it's a good way to engage them. And I had this idea during the pandemic period to involve them in some activities, practical activities. So this can be maybe a tip to use the case study approach in a different way. So if other speakers want to share last inputs, or
I can share something really shortly because I know we are running out of time. But in the masters, I'm coordinating and teaching on ICT-based educational design. So it's also kind of managers in educational design, at least. We don't use case studies, but they make up their own research project and they make up their own design and education development projects and go and connect with professionals and go and connect with primary schools or youth schools or higher education institutions and work with them and collaborate with them about something, a product they will put out in the end. And the product then is part of their exam paper. So they deliver a video pitch, an academic poster, a design product or a prototype, and then a written up paper with a literature study. So again, these are all formats they can go and use in their future life where they have to do these sorts of things, pitch something, create a prototype or something else. And I'm then managing their research process or their learning process. But what they are passionate about is really the driver of the front seat of their process here.
Thank you. Thank you. We have 1 minute to wrap up and some closing remarks from Maria.
So many inputs, so many things. So one thing is, how do we implement this vision of an open, accessible, democratic, attractive university? Just a joke on what Robert was saying. Last year, we had a film director doing faculty development for us. And he said, be aware of the fact that there are other institutions, agencies that are better than you in attracting audiences. So Google, Amazon, they will steal your job if you are not good in attracting and making learning, either digital, formal, informal, hybrid, attractive. So maybe a question we can leave for future meetings is, what is the role of the university management, of the institution? I mean, there is faculty development, there is the perception of students, but very important in order to fulfill this dream of the open university, of the hyper-hybrid open university. Very important is the role of management and the alliances, as Robert was saying. We will have students studying at multiple universities. So how do we fulfill this dream of multiversity, maybe? So this is just very briefly what I want.
Thank you. I just underline what Rick said. We have to honor the purpose of university, and I really love this word, honor the purpose of our university in tackle the new challenges for the future. So thank you, Maria. Thank you to all our speakers for the inputs, for sharing your ideas, and hope to see you in presence, let's say, in the next future, or virtually too is fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks. Have a great day.